I do want to introduce someone. Our library board chair is here, which is really special for us, Kimberly Johnson. She's going to introduce our next speaker, but here's Kimberly, and I want to say that Kimberly, as our board chair and someone who lives and works in Buffalo, has been dedicated to independent authors. In fact, she's brought in several authors over the last couple of years to talk about their books and talk about their experiences. But I'm going to let you introduce Brian. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you. Thank you all for coming. I think that this is a wonderful way for us to highlight not only the importance of writing and books and reading, but also how to share our experiences and get clarity in the direction we want to go with our writing and our information. So I don't want to hold this thing up at all. I'm going to get right into introducing our next guest. So next up is Brian Hayden. Brian is a lifelong Buffalonian with a passion for travel and storytelling. His background in journalism, history, and destination marketing, including his role at the Buffalo and Niagara, the Visit Buffalo and Niagara. He is in his current position as Director of Communications and Community Engagement at the Buffalo History Museum, has given him a rich perspective on all the Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and all that Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and Western New York has to offer. So without further ado, I give you Brian Hayden. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Joy. What a delight it is to be here this morning. You know, tomorrow will mark 3 months, actually. It's interesting following in Jeff's footsteps here as someone, you know, Jeff having published books for years now. This is my first book, 111 Places in Buffalo That You Must Not Miss. It came out on August 5th of this year, and I've just been, it's kind of a surreal journey in a way to have your first book come to fruition. But I thought I could kind of, you know, lead you through how this came together. And specifically, the takeaway that I want you all to have today is about story ideation. You know, this is 111 places in Buffalo that you must not miss, but what it really is 111 stories about Buffalo and Niagara Falls. And so, you know, I'm going to kind of lead you through how I came up with the stories that went into this book, and hopefully just kind of get the wheels turning for you of where can you find compelling stories, how, you know, kind of walk you through that process of story ideation. So, like I said, I mean, this is really, you know, a presentation about the stories behind the stories. And the series actually is out of Cologne, Germany. The publisher is Emons Publishing out of Cologne. The number 11 is a lucky number in Cologne, Germany, but you can't just write about 11 places, so they stuck another one on there. And these guidebooks exist for cities across Europe and North America, but there had never been one written for our hometown of Buffalo, New York. So how did this all get started? How am I even up here today talking to you all about this book? It really, I would say, dates back, you know, to my time. I spent 6 years as the communications manager of Visit Buffalo Niagara. And I got to the incredible opportunity, you know, at 25 years old, 10 years ago, to work to pitch travel writers about what makes Buffalo a compelling place to visit. And so you talk about story ideation. It's both thrilling and challenging and slightly intimidating to basically have desk-side meetings with travel writers where you're trying to essentially sell them on a compelling story about Buffalo, and they've been all over the world and they have seen it all and done it all, and so often the response back you get is, what else you got? If the story just is not quite up to snuff. But it got me really good at pitching and story ideation. You know, it was quite a journey in that way. And this is a picture, actually, of me with Jennifer Bain, who is the former travel editor of the Toronto Star. I pitched her on coming to Buffalo and had the opportunity to host her several times over the course of my time at VBN. And you spend a lot of time with these writers, and you become friends with them, you develop a relationship with them. And so, you know, basically how this came about, Jennifer had written 111 places in Calgary, Alberta that you must not miss. She had a connection out in Calgary too. And when the COVID pandemic hit, as you know, the tourism industry was obliterated then. And my position at VBN came to an end during COVID. But then Jennifer reached out and said, you know, I wrote this book about Calgary, you should really consider writing 111 Places in Buffalo book. So, you know, it struck me as a sort of Herculean task. Like 111 places, how many are going to come up with, you know, 111 compelling chapters to fit in this book? So I sat on it for a while, but during that very bleak pandemic winter of 2020-2021, I didn't really feel like just like sitting around and watching TV. I was single at the time, and I thought, I'm gonna put a book proposal together. And so that's what I did. I got in touch with the editor that Jennifer had connected me with, or had provided the contact information with, and basically, you know, started to put together this proposal of 111 places in Buffalo. When you have a book like this, the publisher has a framework basically of the types of chapters that belong in a book like this. And so, as you can see, there's a huge amount of, you know, sort of categories, I think maybe 24 at all, of art, architecture, literary history, women's history, black history, food and drink, immigrants old and new, true crime. And the benefit of then having a framework like this, I have my own personal favorite haunts in Buffalo. Like I love to go down to Silo City or grab a drink at Founding Fathers Pub, or in the summertime go out to Connor's hot dog stand in Angola on the Lake. But like, that's my own lens. And what, you know, this category list provides every writer with really, is the chance to kind of step beyond themselves and indulge their curiosity and follow leads and ideas that maybe they would not have had otherwise. So I mean, you know, it causes us to grow. It causes us to look at our city and our region in a whole different lens than we would otherwise. So I do think this is absolutely true. This picture, at the time I was living at 111 Wabash in Kenmore, New York. You know, it just so happened I moved in like a month before I put this proposal together too. So perhaps it was a coincidence, but I mean, I had 40 to 50 ideas to begin with, just because of my role at VBN, you know, and having this sort of great foundation of knowing a bunch of compelling places in our region right off the bat for my work there. But the problem was there's still like another 60 places to go. Oh, what do you do? How do you fill something like that? So that's really, you know, where I hope I can leave a few takeaways with you today. I mean, I think, you know, if we stay open, if we listen, if we learn, if we try to talk to as many people as we can, and be open to research and digging and just looking for compelling stories wherever we can. They exist everywhere if we kind of take the time to look for them. And so that is really how the balance of the book came together. I mean, I talked to as many sources as I could. You know, one family friend, my mom's good friend who lives on Grand Island, told me, "Did you know there's buried treasure in the Niagara River off of Grand Island?" And I said, "No, tell me more." And that led to a chapter about Burnt Ship Creek in Buckhorn Island State Park. it's fact that the French burned a couple of ships at the end of the French and Indian War in the Niagara River there. It's lore that and legend that there's treasure on those ships at the base of the Niagara. So that was, you know, one of the places. And so I just sort of began to collect this broad array of ideas that began to kind of fill out the balance of the book. And I left, you know, 25 to 30 ideas I did not have at the outset of writing it, which is, you know, I kind of made a promise to myself that I could find enough other ideas along the way, that the journey would provide the ideas because of who else I was talking to, of what else I was discovering. I just sort of hoped and figured that the rest of the book would kind of fill out as this journey began. And so, you know, over the course of 2 years, photographer Jesse Pitzler, which that was another wonderful moment of serendipity. I mean, a huge point of difference in this book is that every single chapter has a full-page photo that goes with it, too. He is from Washington State, but he had just finished taking photos for 111 places in Austin, Texas, and moved to here with his wife, who had got a job in Buffalo right as I was putting the proposal together. So in a way, like living at 111 Wabash, just another moment of serendipity in this journey. So we set out and we personally visited every last place that was featured in the book, from the rolling hills of the Southern Tier to the tip of the Niagara County, Old Fort Niagara, and Lake Ontario there, and everywhere in between. So just a few devices, you know, that I kind of considered in putting these chapters together. I tried to find the keepers of the story in as many of the places as I could as I filled out this book. And so I thought I briefly would read a chapter from the Swanee House, which is one of the oldest pubs in Buffalo. It dates back to 1886 on the city's waterfront. And, you know, this was not about just providing an overview of the pub. It was the idea that I knew this pub had played a role. I had heard it, I think, on a Buffalo River history tour, that the bridge attendants at the Michigan Bridge were drinking at the Swanee House the night that the Tewksbury freighter slammed into the bridge, that they weren't around to lift the bridge in time to avert disaster. And so I knew I wanted to, like, create a story about the Swanee House's role in this bridge disaster, but I didn't know how to bring it to life. And so I knew I had met Peg Overdorf in the old First Ward Community Association. And Peg is one of these people who just knows everybody. And so I dropped her a line and said, Peg, you know, this is what I'm thinking. I'd love to do a chapter on the Swanee House. Do you know anything about that night, you know, when the Tewksbury slammed into the bridge? And then she said, my friend's father was drinking there that night. He could talk to you. And I said, perfect. And so, you know, I was able to connect with this Bob Grandy, who was a retired grain scooper. And it gave, you know, it kind of illuminated this chapter. He's been living in the Marine Drive apartments for years and years. And it's this idea that people all around us, you know, are the keepers of the Buffalo story, have these memories, and what an immense, you know, kind of treat it was to connect with him. So, just real quick, Bob Grandy will never forget the night he was drinking at the Swanee House, the city's second oldest pub, when he heard a, quote, unbelievable noise outside. I had never heard anything like it before or after, the retired grain scooper recalled. If you had a plane land outside, it wouldn't have made that much noise. That night was January 21st, 1959, when an unmanned lake freighter, the SS Tewksbury, slammed into the Michigan Avenue Bridge, just around the corner from the pub. Behind the original wooden bar at this 1886 waterfront tavern, you'll find an old newspaper article detailing its role on that infamous night. High winds and ice floes knocked the McGillivray Shearitz, an unmanned vessel, free of its moorings and sent it careening down the Buffalo River. It then slammed into the Tewksbury, and the two ghost ships continued down the river on a collision course with the span. The bridge's lift attendants were, quote, tending beers in the Swanee House before their shift change, the Buffalo News reported, and by the time they reached the bridge, it was too late. Brandy doesn't remember seeing the attendants inside the bar, but did recall running outside only to find total darkness where the bridge once stood. Daylight revealed a twisted mass of steel beams and wreckage. The blockage in the river sent icy cold water flooding into the surrounding neighborhood. Ask the tavern's veteran bartenders about that night, and they'll acknowledge that the bridge attendant's presence there was not a surprise. Drinking during a shift was common in those days, when mill workers and longshoremen poured into the pub from nearby dock freighters, grain silos, and warehouses, a bygone era of Buffalo. The small brick pub with wooden floors and historic photos of tugboats and vintage street maps hanging from its walls is one of the last vestiges from the waterfront's industrial heyday. So, each chapter is just like a 300-word excerpt, and by interviewing Bob, by taking the time to know his story, it kind of provided this sense of place of that, there were people around who still remembered that night, who still remembered this different era of the waterfront that created a whole sort of richer understanding of this place than we ever would have otherwise. Another, fortuitous thing about this book was that in February of 2022, I accepted a new position as Director of Communications at the Buffalo History Museum. And so on Saturdays throughout 2022, I often then found myself in the research library of the Buffalo History Museum, which I don't know how many of you have met Cynthia Van Ness, who's the director of the library there, but she's a Buffalo treasure, and the amazing thing is that you can basically walk in and ask about anything related to Buffalo, and Cynthia, is going to pull up a file on it and give you background that you couldn't have imagined otherwise. And that led to chapters like, Buffalo's oldest tree, which there's a whole chapter in the book about how plaque on this huge tree on Franklin Street, which I'm sure many of you have seen, claiming it's the oldest in Buffalo. But when I went back in the History Museum's archives, there's actually a huge debate going back decades that the well-photographed oak tree in Delaware Park off of Ring Road might actually be the oldest tree in Buffalo. That the whole effort to kind of stake a claim that this Franklin Street sycamore was the oldest might not have actually been rooted in fact. And again, just having that rich historical perspective and being able to use the resources at our disposal. That's what, there are people and institutions here with a lot of knowledge that are ready to help you in the pursuit of the project you're working on. It just created a richer chapter about this place than I ever could have imagined. And then lastly, this idea of following my curiosity. This woman here, when I started the book, we were dating, and then last year we got engaged, and then by the time the book was out, we were husband and wife, actually. So this is my wife, Mel. She's a physician assistant at Jericho Road, and actually, talking to her was hugely helpful too. You have to have people in your life who are supporting your endeavors and acting as a sounding board and kind of helping you, guiding you along the way. And she was such an amazing support. So this chapter here, I was following a dead end of a story idea out at Evangola State Park, and I won't get into the details, but it just was not coming together the way I wanted it to. And but while I was out there, the state park guide was like, "Oh yeah, in the winter we lead guided hikes to see the ice volcanoes here." And I thought, ice volcanoes? Tell me more. And then talking about it with my fiance at the time, she loved it and wanted to join me up there. So one of the, in leaving room, in leaving space to fill out the rest of these chapters, that's where this process of discovery of finding something that I couldn't have imagined at the outset of the proposal was possible. And so with just a few weeks left before deadline, we made it out Evangola in February last year and was able to include a chapter, about the fact that, the eastern shore of Lake Erie is one of the best places in North America to see these ice volcanoes form in bitterly cold weather. So I think, this idea of just remaining open, creating a space for ideas and indulging your curiosity whenever possible. If something sounds interesting to you, follow it, pursue it, see what's out there in order to create a compelling story too. So that, basically then by March of this year, turned in the manuscript to the editor. I will say in terms of the editing process, it was a big kind of hold your breath moment, because in this particular project, they reviewed, my first 20 chapters, and then were very hands-off until I turned in the rest of the manuscript of the other, 90 chapters in the book. And so thankfully, they loved it, and there were just sort of minor tweaks here and there. And I'm very happy to report that the second edition of the book is set to come out hopefully by the end of this month, just because of the strong sales of the first edition. So it's a journey I never really anticipated taking. I did not aspire years ago to become a book author. Didn't expect to be up here this morning, but it's a journey I wouldn't trade in for anything. Sometimes life and circumstances hand you an opportunity, and it's best to just follow it, make the most of it, and see what comes from it. So it's a journey, an adventure I wouldn't trade for anything, and I can't wait to see what's next. So.
Thank you, Brian. Does anybody have any questions for Brian? Okay, I'm going to start here.
Sally.
Hi, Brian.
Hi.
How much of the marketing or sales comes from the international company versus how much do you have to market it yourself? And I'm sure VBN was real proud of you.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I will say, the publisher sent out a press release when the book came out. I have pretty much, with my background in media relations, just really worked it in terms of contacting local media, from Mike Randall at Channel 7. That was one of the last stories he did before he retired, to I think there's going to be something, coming on WBFO pretty soon, but it's that habit of knocking on doors, and when one lead goes cold with media coverage, trying to knock on another door and persevering. So it has been a lot of work, on my end, but no paid advertising, from anyone. So really just depending on some social media and then earned media coverage to help spread the word about this.
Hey Brian, thank you for coming out and speaking to us.
Yeah.
My name is Jesse Zeppel. I just recently self-published a book, Buffalo Waits Memoir. My question is not unsimilar. I wanted to know what advice you could give to locally market, because it's a local book.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think you have to think about the sense of pride that exists in Buffalo, of how proud people in Buffalo are to be from Buffalo, and even those who moved away, are to hail from Buffalo. And I think, that is an ongoing topic that the local media covers. And so, pitching the media is not dissimilar to pitching an editor about a book, because the commonality there is that you have a compelling story idea, and if you can create a pitch that broadcast journalist or someone from the news can sell to their editor, it makes their job easier. But I really think it's keeping in mind audience, pride of place, sense of place, that Buffalo media love positive stories about Buffalo too, and so if you can kind of tap into that energy, I think there's a good shot at getting some coverage too.
Hi, beautiful presentation, so interesting, right here. I have two questions. where can we find your book in Buffalo? And also, since this is new for you, you're a new writer apparently. What's your next project?
Great question.
Find your book at the library.
It is at the library. In fact, I do need to give a plug. One of the places you must not miss is the Mark Twain Room in the Central Library. The story there is just how the extraordinary story of the reunion of the two pieces of Mark Twain's manuscript that came to this library like a century apart from one another. So definitely check out that chapter and go upstairs to see the Mark Twain Room. It's on sale at Talking Leaves, all three local Barnes and Nobles. Buffalo Shopcraft on Elmwood is selling it, Dog Ears Bookstore, and it is at the Buffalo History Museum gift shop as well. And I know the library has like 36 copies in circulation, so you have to give a good plug for borrowing it as well. I'd be thrilled to have you borrow it from one of your local branches. Next project, that's a great question. I mean, right now I've just been focused on rolling it out. I mean, I will say there are other parts of New York State that I think are just made for a series like this. So I spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks. I spent more time in the Finger Lakes, and it would be a dream of mine to somehow make something like that work. It's a little hard when you're balancing a full-time job, though, too. So those are the kind of things, in realities I'm sifting through. And so, it could be, I'd be thrilled even to just write another book about Buffalo. But it's funny, no matter how much work this was and how much effort, there is nothing in the world like getting a book published. And so I'm hooked, and I'm definitely going to be doing something else, but stay tuned.
Given that your publisher is out of Cologne, Germany, how did you communicate and orchestrate all the editing and putting together of the work?
Yeah, I mean, so the publisher is out of Germany, but actually what made communication much easier, they do have a designated North American editor, although she does split her time between New York City and Paris. And talk about like that there's always a Buffalo connection. This North American editor's husband happened to be from Buffalo, and so she also had like routinely visited to see her in-laws throughout the years. So I mean, I'll admit, like there is some serendipity involved here, even breaking through the noise and landing this pitch. But it kind of speaks to, you never know what's possible when you're knocking on a door, and this editor was motivated to see a book about Buffalo, come to fruition too, because she had been here and recognized what a special place it was. So that, definitely played into it.
So Brian, we're going to do 3 quick questions. 1,
Yes.
2, and then I'm going to get to the other side. And I promise after Brian, after the next speaker, I'm going to go on that side for questions.
Okay.
Spend a lot of time here.
Thank you very much for sharing your process and your experience. You mentioned that your publisher was instrumental in helping you provide a framework for your book. I'm wondering, in reflection, do you have any suggestions or ideas as to how you can go about it in case the publisher may not have that? How would you, what recommendations would you make to an author?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because I guess in a way, like by having this framework, it made it much easier as a first-time author to make something happen, because this whole kind of formula existed for the book, even though it became so unique to Buffalo and Western New York. I mean, in a way, I think the answer is probably through, the old saying of like, you are what you eat, or, you are what you read too. And if through reading and reading and reading, and you begin to see, the types of books that you'd be interested in, and then they're still in writing, but there still then is a leap of ideation that has to take place of, okay, I love these books that I've read, but what am I going to create what is this leap of faith I'm taking that is something the public hasn't quite seen before? Because I mean, in truth, there are a couple of other travel books about Buffalo even, circulating out there. This is not the only one in the marketplace. But I think the focus on both storytelling and just the wide variety of topics and some of the obscure places, filled a niche that wasn't really covered before. But I mean, I just think, you have to kind of zero in on what is your unique contribution going to be that sort of is a point of differentiation that separates you from any other book, that's been written before. And you can't do that alone, and that's where I think, even if it's just an army of well-read friends and family who can kind of give you feedback on that too, or if you're able to work with others, other local authors, just the more you talk it out and refine and write, the more successful that process will be.
So I'm curious if you can elaborate a little bit more on pitching to media, and particularly how you go about differentiating your pitches after you've already been picked up.
That's
In 1 minute or less.
Uh-oh.
You can talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you have to keep finding fresh angles. The book came out in August, and so it was news back then, and I got some coverage on like channels 2 and 7 back then, and thankfully some other coverage sort of sprang from those initial pitching efforts. I think tomorrow Buffalo Magazine is going to include it in like their top holiday buys, and so then you find like another, like something else, a seasonality or some other angle of, this could be a great holiday gift. What local media are putting together roundups about that. And if I didn't pursue it, but Wednesday was actually 111 Day, where all the authors around the 111 Places series celebrate their books. So like, that was a timely element that maybe I could have pitched like Kate at Most Buffalo or Chelsea at Daytime Buffalo on Channel 4 to, like a fresh angle, something timely, something different. You just have to, in the same way that you have to ideate so many, ideas for this book, you have to keep finding fresh angles for the media if you want to sort of stay in the conversation.
Over here. You mentioned the process to get to 111 stories. I wondered if you wound up with too many and had to make cuts.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely was a bit of like a process. I'll give one example, actually. There was a chapter I wrote that maybe will still make it into a future edition at some time. I really wanted to do one on the USS Sullivans at the Naval and Military Park, and the extraordinary story of the Sullivan brothers, who the ship is named for, and the trials and tribulations that ship has been through. But there, was a threat of it being dry docked for an extended period of time when the book came out. That hasn't actually happened yet, but the editor did not want a place in there that could be not there when the book goes live, basically. So that has been sort of tabled for now. Definitely other ideas that just there wasn't enough sort of there, and the weeding down of just what's most compelling, what would the audience find most interesting. So there's definitely much more than 111 that we considered. I would say closer to probably we were wrestling with anywhere from 125, 140 story ideas all together, and there was definitely some narrowing down that took place. Great, thank you.